There's a popular idea among some Chicago Bears fans that Ryan Poles should use the Chicago Bears' extra draft picks in 2025 to trade up this year to make sure he can get Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Nabers, or Rome Odunze in the first round. But I'm here to tell you, it's not a smart team-building strategy.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on X at Cox Sports One. You can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on all of your favorite social media platforms, including the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. On the show today, we're going to dive into the prospect of the Chicago Bears not trading down from number 9, but trading up higher into the top 10 to make sure they land one of the top 3 wide receivers in this draft, Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Nabers, or Rome Odunze. We'll look at how high the Bears might have to move in order to get one of those wide receivers. We'll look at how much it would cost them to move up, depending on whether that's just 1 or 2 spots, or if that's more like 5 or 6 spots. The cost is significantly different, and we'll look at them in the context of this wide receiver draft class and the value of the picks that the Bears would have to give up in order to go get one of these top wide receivers, and why a move like that just isn't quite worth it for this Bears team. Obviously, you're hoping that one of those 3 wide receivers makes it to the Bears with the 9th overall pick so that you could just stay there and land a guy that you feel like is a blue chip wide receiver prospect to be, the long-term running mate for DJ Moore and a potential another number 1 receiver in development who can spend his rookie season as the number 3 behind Keenan Allen and DJ Moore and learn from Keenan Allen and then be ready to replace Keenan Allen. I'm sure you've heard by this stage of the draft process ad nauseum on why these wide receivers get connected to the Chicago Bears so much. But there's no guarantee that they make it to the 9th overall pick. And I think the general expectation is, and maybe that's too strong of a statement, but I think the general expectation is that none of them will make it to the Chicago Bears with the 9th overall pick. That between all the different teams picking ahead of the Bears, there's a good chance that out of the 8 picks, 3 of them could be wide receivers. It would be historic. You don't typically see or ever see that many wide receivers go that early, but it's that strong of a wide receiver class at the top, and it's why a team like the Chicago Bears might consider the idea of moving up to make sure they get one instead of sitting there at 9 and waiting and hoping that one of them falls all the way down there. So when you look at the window of where these wide receivers might go, they're all going to be fairly concentrated in the same set of picks. And we could see the wide receivers go back to back to back even. All 3 come off the board, 3 picks in a row because the wide receiver needy teams all pick right after each other in this draft. When you look at the draft order, obviously the Bears are going to take Caleb Williams at 1. The Commanders are overwhelmingly expected to take a quarterback at 2. I guess we're not sure who it's going to be, or they could trade down from 2, but a quarterback will be taken number 2 overall by someone if it's not the Washington Commanders. The Patriots at 3 are really the first realistic spot that a wide receiver could go. Most people are expecting a quarterback to be drafted 3rd overall, but it's possible that the Patriots could just stay there and take a wide receiver and not a quarterback, or that the Patriots, I suppose, could trade down from that spot and not take a QB. But if they trade down, someone's trading up to that spot for a quarterback and not a wide receiver. But it is the first spot that you could see a wide receiver go. But even if we say that's a quarterback spot, even if we eliminate that as a possibility, 4, 5, and 6 are the Arizona Cardinals, the Los Angeles Chargers, and the New York Football Giants. Everyone is expecting that if the Cardinals stay at that 4th pick and don't trade down to a quarterback team, if they stay there, they're fully expected to take a wide receiver. wide receivers are the best players in this draft that are not quarterbacks. The Arizona Cardinals are not going to take a quarterback. And so if they stay there, they will take whichever of these wide receivers they rate number one on their draft board. That could be the first one coming off the board. Then you get to the Los Angeles Chargers with the number 5 pick. They just traded away Keenan Allen. They released Mike Williams. So their 2 top wide receivers from last year, both gone. Of course, they used a first-round pick last year on Quentin Johnston. So would they want to use wide receiver picks back-to-back? Maybe, maybe not, but they certainly don't have a lot of other wide receiver depth there. Josh Palmer is going to be their number 2 receiver at this point. There's certainly a lot of room for a top 5 pick at wide receiver to go in number 5 there, right after the Arizona Cardinals take one at number 4. The Chargers could also trade down. The Chargers could also consider maybe another offensive tackle or perhaps another pass rusher in there. I mean, the Chargers could do a few different things here that, to try and build them out for the long-term future. They need a lot, and maybe a trade down for a team moving up for a quarterback. But then you got the Giants at 6, where the Giants could take a quarterback at 6 if they like one of the guys still there. But if 3 or even 4 quarterbacks come off the board before the Giants get to pick, plan B for New York might be a wide receiver. They really don't have a lot of talent at receiver right now. It's Jalen Hyatt, it's Wan'Dale Robinson, it's Darius Slayton. They signed Isaiah McKenzie as a free agent, but none of those guys are as good as any of the wide receivers in this draft. I suppose, could they go after maybe an offensive tackle? They kind of a competition now at right tackle. I don't necessarily think they would. Could they trade down? Maybe, but that's a team that's primed to take a wide receiver, maybe a corner. But all 4 of those teams, Patriots, Cardinals, Chargers, and Giants, all could just as easily take wide receivers as they could trade down or take other positions. Those are all primary need wide receiver teams. Even the Titans at 7 and the Falcons at 8. We talked about them a little bit a couple weeks ago on the podcast. The Titans just signed Calvin Ridley. They still have DeAndre Hopkins and Treylon Burks, but some people think they could still take a wide receiver. I don't necessarily, but I guess we can't rule it out. And same with the Atlanta Falcons, where they signed Darnell Mooney and traded for Rondale Moore. They still have Drake London as their number 1. And can't forget Kyle Pitts as a top pass-catching weapon there. They've got receiver talent, so they don't need one. But either the Titans or the Falcons could see the wide receivers as the number 1 receivers on their board and try and take them. So that would be the Bears' incentive to try and jump up to 6, to 5, maybe even to 4, depending on which of the wide receivers you want, right? Are you willing to trade up for any of the 3 receivers, or are you only trading up for Marvin Harrison Jr.? But if you can't trade up for Harrison Jr., then just stay at 9 and wait and see if Odunze falls. Does Ryan Poles fall in love with all 3 of these wide receivers equally to where he's got to get up just to get any of them, or is there one in particular, a Malik Nabers from LSU? It's I got to get Nabers. So where do I have to trade up to get this specific player as the one that he might see as better than the other 2? And that's where you might have to move up a little higher than you might want, or have to give up a bit more to go get that player. Plus, you have to consider that other teams might be also trying to trade up for some of these wide receivers. Or, if you're letting the draft play out a little bit and Odunze makes it past 4 and makes it past 5, gets the Giants at 6, at that point, do you have to trade up, or do you just say, I don't think the Titans and Falcons are going to take him, so let's just try and make him fall to number 9. This is where it gets kind of treacherous when you decide how urgently or how desperately you feel like you have to move up to make sure you get one of these wide receivers, especially because it's going to cost you sometimes a lot, depending on how far you're willing to go. And the Bears don't have a lot of draft picks, certainly not this year, to move up, but some extra draft picks next year that give them a little bit more capital and a little bit more wiggle room. But how much are they willing to part ways with, and how much is that going to cost? We'll go through how recent trade ups into the top 10 have worked in the NFL, what those have cost other teams, to get a sense of what it might cost Ryan Poles to move up for a receiver next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with that 3% match. That's right, there is no cap on that 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024 validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA is available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. If the Chicago Bears want to move up for a wide receiver, or I guess for anything, but specifically for a wide receiver in this case, they've got some extra draft capital next year to use that you might feel like is a bonus that would be worth spending to get one of these wide receivers next year. But depending on how far they want to move, it's going to cost them of varying amounts that could become even more than you might be willing to spend if you're putting yourselves in the Chicago Bears shoes. So when you look ahead to 2025, the Bears have right now all of their regular draft picks 1 through 7, plus they've got an extra second round pick from the DJ Moore trade, believe it or not, from the Carolina Panthers. And then I believe they have an extra 5th round pick that they got. And I'm struggling to remember which trade that came from, but they have an extra day 3 draft pick a little bit later on next year as well. So those are some picks to work with to feel like, okay, you could trade up using next year's second round pick, one of your extra second round picks from next year, so that you'd still have a pick in every round. It's kind of a bonus in that regard to ensure that you get the guy you might really like in this year's draft class. But the question is like, how far can you move up with just a future second round pick? You know, that's no matter what your favorite mock draft simulator machine might do, it's not going to get you to the Cardinals at 4. Like I tested this in the PFF, which I love PFF and I love their mock draft simulator. I use it all the time. But like you can trade the Bears' 9th pick with a future second and get to the 4th in the simulator. But in real life, you're not going to be able to go from 9 to 4 just by giving up a future second round pick. That's not what teams have accepted as trade value to move into the top 5 of a draft. I went back through the last couple of decades of draft trades, and there aren't a ton of perfect comparisons here, but there's a couple that are close enough to kind of give us a sense of the general range. And maybe I'll start by summarizing it this way, that if you want to move up from the 9th pick, if you're the Chicago Bears, more or less, if you want to move up 1 or 2 spots, it's going to cost you a 4th round pick and maybe a little bit more. So, like last year, we saw the Eagles and the Bears trade go from 9 to 10 was for a 4th round pick. In years past, we've seen back in 2012, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers went from 7 to 5, up 2 spots, and that was only for a 4th round pick. I think it kind of depends. I think if you're going to go from 9 to 7, it might cost you a 4th and, a future 6th, 4th and change to get there. Whereas if you're just going to go up 1 spot, it's just a 4th round pick. So that's potentially reasonable. If you just want to make sure you get past the Falcons at 8 for whatever reason, swap with the Titans at 7, give up the Bears' 4th round pick. Sure, you don't want to give up that pick, but it's a fairly reasonable cost if you really feel like that's going to ensure that you get this type of wide receiver for your team. If you want to move up maybe 3 or 4 spots from 9 to 6 or 9 to 5, well, then you're looking at a little bit more. That's where I think your 3rd round pick this year or potentially your future 2nd round pick next year is enough to get you up those 3 or 4 spots. And it always depends on how many other teams are you competing with and how desperately that team wants to move down versus how badly they'd rather just stay there. Like there's always different market dynamics that don't make this super clear cut at all times. But a while back we saw the Saints in 2008 went from pick 10 to pick 7, so up 3 spots there for a 3rd round pick. And I think generally the NFL tends to value future round draft picks as something slightly lesser than what they current round would be. So like the Bears' future second is not worth the same as a 2nd round pick this year, but it's worth just a little bit less. It's somewhere between a 2nd and a 3rd round pick kind of value is how teams will do it. Like a future pick is worth like a late version of that pick in the current year, that kind of thing. So that's where I think if the Bears just said, hey, number 9 plus our future 2nd round pick could probably get you to 6 where the New York Giants are. I mean, you might have to throw in, again, like another late round pick, a little bit something extra than just the future 2nd round pick, or perhaps it's the Bears trade 9 and 75, their 3rd round pick, to the Giants for that pick, and maybe you again have to throw in something like that. But that's kind of where the the draft trade math comes down. And then if you wanted to move up to, to like 4, where the Cardinals are, or to maybe even to 5, or dare I say the Patriots at 3, that's where it's going to cost you at least a future first round pick. I look back at the Sammy Watkins trade as I think is what people are going to, what teams are going to hold to a high standard there. Like, yes, people think the Bills overpaid to trade up for Sammy Watkins, but like, you're trading up for a top wide receiver in this draft. You want a top wide receiver in this draft, you got to pay Sammy Watkins prices. The Bills traded the 9th overall pick, just like the Bears had, plus a future first round pick, plus a future 4th round pick to move up to number 4 to take Sammy Watkins. So if the Bears want to move up from 9 to number 4 to take Marvin Harrison Jr., it's going to cost a future first plus, some kind of other draft pick capital to get to 4 to get Marvin Harrison. And so it becomes a different conversation of, okay, is Marvin Harrison, or if your guy is Malik Nabers, or even if you want Rome Odunze first, like, is that wide receiver worth essentially 2 first-round picks to go get? Like, yes, that future first-round pick is in the future, and it doesn't feel like it's right here, right now, and you go, okay, well, we could give up that future first and still have 2 seconds next year, so we'd be fine, right? It's easy to sort of devalue what that future first-round pick might look like, but think about where the Bears might be drafting next year. I mean, if they make the playoffs, like if you think about it as, say they pick 20th, 21st, 22nd, if we're going to be, generous and say, okay, like Bears are going to pick 22nd next season because they make the playoffs in year 1 under Caleb Williams. If the Bears had the 22nd pick today, would you trade 9 plus 22 to get to 4 and draft Marvin Harrison Jr. or Malik Nabers? Or would you stay at 9, take Joe Alt, then go to 22 and take Chop Robinson, an edge rusher from Penn State, or vice versa? Stay at 9 and take Dallas Turner, and then down at 22, take an offensive tackle like Olufushanu or J.C. Latham from Alabama, or one of these guys that, like, imagine what you could do with that second first-round pick this year instead of just taking Marvin Harrison. You could trade down and take a wide receiver there. Like, maybe that's the better math here. Would you rather have Joe Alt at 9 plus Brian Thomas Jr. from LSU at 22? Or Marvin Harrison? You know what I mean? If you're equating Marvin Harrison to being worth these 2 first-round picks, then pick the 2 first-round players you like the most. And would you rather have the really, really good wide receiver, or what that draft capital might be worth or might be able to produce for the Chicago Bears? Like, that's what really becomes challenging here, especially because the Bears might not be the only team trying to trade up for these top wide receivers. I mean, it's hard to sit here and say for sure who would be that aggressive going after it, but you could see a team like the Jets wanting to move up for a wide receiver. Maybe the Raiders, but certainly the Saints at 14. Maybe the Colts even possibly at 15. The Bengals at 18 if they move on from T. Higgins, or some big jumps up from somebody like the Rams or the Steelers. Like, some of these teams might be interested in moving up for wide receivers and competing with the Bears. Say the Bears are trying to trade to 6, but so are the Saints. And all of a sudden you have a bidding war. And not only then do you have to give up your future second, but maybe it's your future second and your current 4th to move up 3 spots. Like, does that, all of a sudden the value becomes even lesser for your team and you're down to just one other draft pick. So your draft class would be Rome Odunze at 6 and then whoever you can get in the 3rd round. So that means you don't get to address safety, you don't get to address center, or maybe you don't get to address edge rusher. Like, you got one other position you get to address, or I guess you could trade down in the 3rd and try and get like, a 4th and a 5th, and then you're just getting day 3 picks at some of these other positions you'd like to address in the draft. Like, it all becomes very difficult to piece together a draft class that you feel really, really good about and still trade up to get one of these wide receivers, or you're mortgaging a lot of your future for one of these wide receivers in a year where there are also other really good wide receivers in this draft. And as great as these guys are, I don't feel like you have to get one in the 1st round with the 9th pick to feel like you can address the wide receiver position in a way that you can be really excited about. We'll look at sort of the draft class value of wide receiver and why you look at the rest of these receivers, it doesn't feel as worth it to move up to 9 when you can get pretty good players elsewhere. Next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Gametime, the best way to get tickets for all of your favorite live events. I use Gametime all the time, and I cannot recommend it enough. It's the best place to get tickets for concerts, sports games, theater shows, comedy shows, you name it, they've got it at Gametime. I used it to go to a couple Bears games last year. I've gone to a couple basketball games on there. I've gone to a number of concerts on Gametime. I just bought Blink-182 tickets on Gametime just last week. It's really a great ticket buying experience because you can see your view from your seat, and they've got all-in pricing, so you're not going to get any surprise fees popping up at checkout that make your tickets cost way more than you thought they would. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem our code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. The Locked On Bears podcast is also brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. We're talking superchargers, exhaust kits, roof racks, LED headlights, and more. Whatever you need, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your vehicle, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need, at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. These top wide receivers in this draft, Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Nabers, Rome Odunze, are very, very good. They all should be, in theory, number one wide receivers in the NFL, 1,000-yard guy, blue chip type prospects. That's desirable for any team. I think every team would love to have these players, but it doesn't mean every team should be trading up to try and get them. And between what the Bears already have in terms of pass-catching weapons for DJ Moore and Keenan Allen and Cole Kmet and Gerald Everett and DeAndre Swift out of the backfield, and also what the rest of this wide receiver draft class looks like, it's just not worth it for the Bears right now to give up future draft picks or more draft picks from an already small draft class this year and go up and get one of these other players. First of all, I wonder if the odds are high that all three of these wide receivers prove to be great. Will all three of these wide receivers all be, Jamar Chase, Sammy Watkins, Julio Jones level players, right? Will all three of them? I think none of the three are going to be busts. I'm not predicting that, but is there a chance that one or two of them are more like, I don't want this to be an insult, but Drake London for the Falcons, right? Rookie year, 850 yards. Second year, 900 yards. He's a very good receiver, but he's not a take over the game-changing, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson type receiver that's just wow, the Falcons got an absolute home run. They took him 8th overall. He's very good. That's fine. He's a fine wide receiver. He'll be a productive wide receiver for his whole career for as long as he wants to go. This is not an insult to Drake London. But if we're trading up to go get Malik Nabers, Rome Odunze, Marvin Harrison, you're trading up into the top 6, presumably, maybe top 7 at the least. You need that guy to be something very, very special. And if they just prove to be very good, good player, good. I mean, is that still worth it? Are you trading up for a guy who could be a good receiver? Because you can find good receivers elsewhere in the draft, right? I think the whole point of wanting to make sure you land Nabers or Odunze or Harrison is because you really feel like this wide receiver is special. This wide receiver can be something that the other wide receivers in this draft class cannot be. And I think there are other wide receivers in this draft class that can be, again, a Drake London. It's not an insult. He's just the one that comes to mind right away as the guy who wasn't spectacular, but just very good. I'm trying to think of another good example, so I'm not just bagging out. Jahan Dotson with the Washington Commanders, maybe he's been a little bit underwhelming, or Treylon Burks from the Titans. These are more realistically what first-round wide receivers end up being. You don't come into the league and be a 1,500-yard guy his first season. Maybe even Jackson Smith and Jigba from the Seahawks is a great example there. These guys are not busts. Maybe Kadarius Toney's more of a bust as a first-round wide receiver. We're not talking about these guys being busts, but just be good. But you can find good wide receivers later in the draft. There are always good wide receivers later in the draft. And in a growing frequency, we're seeing great wide receivers later in the draft. And if there's a chance that there's a Puka Nacua in the 5th round this year, or an Amon-Ra St. Brown in the 4th round this year, who can be 1,500 yards receivers that not only do you not have to use the 1st round pick or trade up for, but like you could use your 3rd or 4th round pick and have one of these guys pan out. I mean, again, there's no predicting who that's going to be, and you're not saying it's likely that you're going to find those guys, but the fact that every year there are those guys makes it less valuable and less necessary to feel like you have to get that guy at the very top of this draft. Like when I look at some of the top young wide receivers in the NFL right now, there are plenty of the Jamar Chases, right? 3rd overall pick, 1st wide receiver taken in the draft. But a lot of the other top younger guys are not players who teams had to desperately trade up for or teams had to get in the top 10 for. Like there's not a lot of top 10 picks among the top wide receivers in the NFL right now. I was looking around. Like, of course, we mentioned Justin Jefferson, 22nd overall pick by the Vikings. He was the 5th wide receiver taken in that draft that was viewed as a strong wide receiver class. But it wasn't like the Vikings had to trade up and give up a bunch of future draft picks to go get this can't-miss wide receiver. A few different teams missed on taking Justin Jefferson and took someone else instead. And there were other good picks in that draft. I think that was also the CeeDee Lamb draft, where the Cowboys took CeeDee Lamb 17th overall in that draft. Still 1st-round picks. But CeeDee Lamb was the 3rd wide receiver taken in that draft. There were 2 wide receivers taken before CeeDee Lamb and another one that was also not Justin Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb in that same 1st-round draft class. Like, really good wide receivers don't have to be at the top of the draft, don't have to be top 10 picks, aren't going to be the 1st or 2nd wide receivers taken in their draft. Don't even have to be 1st-round picks. A.J. Brown, now with the Philadelphia Eagles, but of course dominant with the Titans before that. He was a 2nd-round pick. He was still the 4th wide receiver taken in his draft class. So not, we're not talking about a huge sleeper in that regard, but 51st overall pick, like middle of the 2nd round, not early 2nd round, middle of the 2nd round, one of the best young wide receivers in football comes. And then, of course, there's the guys that are a little bit more the exception, but as we keep having exceptions, they become less of an exception. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 112th overall pick, 4th round pick, 17th wide receiver taken in that draft. Puka Nacua, 177th pick. There's a 5th round pick, the 20th wide receiver taken in his draft. Tyreek Hill in the 5th round was again in the upper teens. Like Hill at least had like some off the field concern stuff that helped make him fall. Whereas like Amon-Ra St. Brown and Puka Nacua were just like everyone missed on their evaluation. And somehow those guys ended up being great. Throw in Cooper Kupp as a 3rd round pick who was the leading receiver in the NFL, had almost 2,000 yards receiving. Like you do not have to take a wide receiver in the top 5 in order to find great ones. It's easier to find them in the 1st round. And generally, the earlier you take these receivers, the better they end up being. I mean, there's plenty of guys that are just fine. Like Chris Olave is a 1,000-yard guy, like 15th overall pick. The other Ohio State receiver, Garrett Wilson, to the Jets, he was, again, in the teens, like 1st round. Like these are not necessarily the top wide receiver taken, but you can find really good wide receivers at 17, at 15, at 22. And you don't have to take one at 9, and you certainly don't have to trade up for one to get the top guy, because even the very tip-top guy is not the 1st wide receiver taken. I would say it's not often the best wide receiver in any draft class. So you don't have to be the team that goes up to get one of these guys. If anything, like I would love to trade down from 9, and you could still take a wide receiver then. Brian Thomas Jr. from LSU, Xavier Worthy from Texas. I think both of those guys are really going to be studs in the NFL. They don't have quite the pedigree, the production, or the elite, athletic measurements that Malik Nabers and Rome Odunze have, but like there's more to being a successful NFL football player than your athletic measurements and your college production. And these guys are both really good wide receivers as well. Like that's why I just think investing so early at wide receiver on a team like the Bears, where it's not a huge need, is not the wisest decision. If it would be different if the Bears hadn't traded for Keenan Allen and you just had DJ Moore and Tyler Scott right now, then wide receiver is that much bigger of a need, and you really got to get your can't miss guy with that blue chip wide receiver. Like Keenan Allen and the signing of Gerald Everett absolutely changed the wide receiver math here for the Chicago Bears. It would be different if they were not here, but when you already have some decent receiver talent, it's not a huge hole, and you could find good wide receivers later on every year, and it's going to cost you an arm and a leg to move up from number 9 overall pick. Like it just doesn't add up to being a worthwhile move for the Chicago Bears to get desperate and move up for one of these top guys when there will be other options for them at wide receiver and other bigger, more pressing needs to address. And hey, you could stay at 9 and still get a really good football player that you love just at a different position, an offensive tackle, an edge rusher, whatever. Like that's ultimately where I don't think a trade up for a wide receiver is A, a good idea, or B, likely to happen. I would love to hear what you think, though, about what the Bears should do there. Would you be in favor of trading up for a wide receiver? And if so, which wide receiver would you trade up for? What would you be willing to give up to move up for that wide receiver? Let me know in the comments here on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, or you can tweet us at Locked On Bears or post in the Locked On Bears Facebook group. However you do it, just make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Have some good podcast interviews coming down the pipeline here soon. We're going to talk to the host of Locked On USC about Caleb Williams. We're going to talk to Derek Clausen from Bleacher Report about this quarterback draft class. We're going to talk to draft analyst Matt Williamson. That's our Matt Williamson. Matt Waldman of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio about Caleb Williams and some of his top wide receivers in this draft class as well. So a lot more goodies coming your way. Make sure you're subscribed, making us your first listen every single day. And in exchange, I promise to always make time for you to bear down.